every damn day.
What's happening, good listener? Welcome inside the TCA studio in beautiful Bytown, Canada. Matt Robinson with you as always. Give us a follow on social media at Tall Can Audio and make sure you're subscribed to the pod wherever you're hearing us right now. Big show today. We're going to talk to the legendary play-by-play voice of the Ottawa Senators, Dean Brown, here in just a minute. I want to talk to him a little bit whether or not sports have gotten a little too chummy, a little too buddy-buddy between athletes from different teams. Something certainly brought to bear here over the last day or two by Randy Arozarena and Cal Rowley at the World Baseball Classic. I find that a little interesting, so we'll talk to him about that, as well as the NHL trade deadline. Which matchups look kind of enticing in the upcoming Stanley Cup Playoffs? Will the Sens be a part of those playoffs? We'll get to a lot of that in just a moment with Dean Brown, but I also want to let you know that coming up on Thursday morning, we'll have a brand new episode of the show, and we'll do a little bit of a deep dive on the TV ratings coming out of NHL Trade Center. And look, the trades themselves that have been made have been covered to death, and we'll leave it alone on that episode and just talk about what it means that for another year, TSN has kicked the ass of Rogers Sportsnet in the ratings. And Sportsnet's owned the national rights for well over a decade now. They just bought like 7 more years of those rights, and they still cannot get out in front of TSN. They can't even really get close. And you got to be careful how you measure these things, because Sportsnet has way more games than TSN does. They have bigger games. They have the 4 nations, right? And they have the playoffs. And they have all these things that TSN doesn't have. So overall, Sportsnet is drawing more viewers for hockey and just about everything else. Certainly, you have the Blue Jays all summer and everything else. They have more eyes than TSN does. And yet, whenever you give viewers a choice, after this long, if there's a day where both networks are doing something, trade deadline day or free agency day, where you can pick which network you want to watch, people are still picking TSN like 12 years into Rogers claiming to be the home of hockey. We'll dive into that on the Thursday morning edition of the podcast, so stay tuned for that. But for now, we want to get to our friend Dean Brown, the play-by-play voice of the Ottawa Senators. Dean, what's happening? How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Yeah, things are okay here. We're getting a brief window into spring here in the nation's capital. It's supposed to be short-lived, my understanding, but it's nice at the moment.
Yeah, it's my laneway is thawing out just in time for another big whack of snow apparently on the weekend and some freezing rain. So it's Canada, it's what we do.
In the nation's capital, you sort of get a feel for like, don't buy it. There's always one sort of fake out where they're like, it's here, it's spring, it's winter's over. No, there's one more kick to the gut coming. And
yeah.
So,
well, I think that's because too many of us grew up during a time before radical climate change where the canal basically thawed at the same time the spring arrived. And now that is not the case. The canal can thaw in February and never get to the point where it's thick enough to skate on it again, but you still have a month and a half of winter.
If it freezes at all, right? Some years, right? This year we had a good long run with it, but last year, the year before, whatever it was, we didn't get it frozen at all. So
yeah. The variance in climate is trying to trick us all the time.
It's true. Look, let me start you on something I know you love, Dean. Have you been watching the World Baseball Classic? I know you're a big baseball guy.
Well, no, I've been busy. But see Matt, that's a misnomer. Mm-hmm. I like baseball when baseball is not wasting my time.
Okay.
I loved it when my son was playing Little League. I loved watching it because they moved the game along. Major League Baseball has done a great job, I think, to speed the game up. Mm-hmm. Because while purists who used to call me some kind of a devil for even suggesting that the games were ridiculously long for no good reason, now we're all applauding the fact that the games are a lot shorter. And ironically enough, I think I read you that list that I had from years ago. Ironically, that was like, I think 10 or 11 years ago I wrote that. And now 80% of what I wrote has been instituted in some way to speed the game up,
Yeah.
Not that I was a genius, but it was like, it was obvious to everybody what you had to do to stop these games being 4, 5, and 6 hours, So, good for baseball. But during the hockey season, I don't have much extra time to watch much baseball, never mind international baseball.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I think this is somewhat universal, and you've sort of been around, much like myself, here long enough to watch a bit of an evolution across sports. But the big story coming out of the World Baseball Classic today is that two teammates from the Seattle Mariners, Randy Arozarena from he's right now playing for Team Mexico, goes up to the plate, and he sort of puts his hand out either to give kind of a fist bump or a shake of the hand to his Seattle teammate, but who's playing catcher for Team USA, Cal Rowley. And Rowley leaves him hanging. He won't give him the fist bump. He won't give him the little acknowledgement. And throughout a 162-game Major League season, you see it all the time. Guys who used to be buds will kind of go up, give a nod, give a laugh, like, hey, good to see you kind of thing. The first baseman is always chatting with whoever has made his way down there. But this is now a thing, and Arozarena is pretty pissed. He kind of gave it to Rowley in the media after the game that, in 4 different languages, actually, ripped him, which hell of a talent.
Very good.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of curious because we have seen this across sports, and as well as anybody as someone who has sort of behind-the-scenes access, and you're down there, between locker rooms, and you can see guys coming out to meet each other who maybe played junior together, who have played internationally together, or used to be on the same team. Is there, in your opinion, has it taken away at all from the sport that, like, I remember reading books, Dean, that, when Montreal and Detroit would take the train back in the original 6 days, if Detroit got to the train station first, they took the car closest to the dining car, and Montreal would just have to refuse to walk through, and they wouldn't get to eat on the train back and forth during the playoffs. Like, there was a legitimate hatred. There was a legitimate dislike for each other that seems to be missing. Is this little thing between Rowley and Arozarena just kind of a weird one-off? Do we miss the intensity like that in sports, or are we better off without it in your mind?
I don't know if we're better off without it, just the way it is. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. And part of it is, I don't think, Matt, you can say there's a universal, this is how players react to each other, because some guys are more hardcore than others. Some guys are very loose about it. Some guys don't care. Some guys do. There's no one-size-fits-all description for the environment as it is. I had talks when I worked with Denny Potvin about this, and he was, and I agree with him, he was very much of the mind that us against them, if you're not on my team, if you're not one of my brothers, you're my enemy. That whole mentality came, in his area. He said, for us, the Butch Goring trade was a huge thing for us because by and large, our roster hadn't changed in 4 years.
Right.
Like, there were no new guys in the locker room every fall for hockey. Like that back then, that didn't happen. You had the same roster for years on end.
You didn't get free agency until you were like 34 or whatever else. And so nobody changed hands. Now guys jump all the time.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, like Denny would say, when the PA came into being, when the union, the NHLPA came into being, it was not nearly the same kind of thing when it started, not nearly the same kind of endeavor that it is now. And Denny would say, it's pretty hard to have that grizzled hatred for another guy on another team when, first of all, about 20% of the league moves every year, traded, retired, new rookies come in. So there's player movement all over the place, which raises the average salary, which is what the players want. But, you're constantly playing against guys you've played with somewhere else, number one. But number two, as Denny used to say, it's pretty hard to hate a guy when you're sitting around having cappuccinos in the summertime at the PA meetings and then learn to hate him come October. You know what I mean? Like, sure. Players who aren't teammates develop relationships at these events that are somewhat union related, but also have a social component to them. So you have a relationship with a guy of some kind, and now you're supposed to go out on the ice and hate him, next Thursday at 7, so it's just changed that whole environment. But you're always going to have some guys that, they are, during the game, we're opponents, and after the game we can be whatever we are, teammates or friends or whatever. But you've also seen, especially in hockey, you've also seen instances where brothers who play on different teams get in a fight. Sure. Because you got to fight for your team, and if it's your brother, it's your brother. Like that has happened because that's been a mentality in hockey and in some other sports as well. But
do you think there's value in performance just for the sake of the fans? And I'll draw you back to not too long ago. Toronto went out to Vegas and played Mitch Marner for the first time.
Yep.
And we take warm-ups and everybody's doing their own thing. And at the very end of it, Mitch is the last one on the ice, just like he always used to be in Toronto. And he sort of fires one to Matthews, just like he always would have done in warm-up, but Matthews going off. And Matthews pretends not to see it and just walks off, doesn't acknowledge it, doesn't receive the pass. When the media ask him about it, he goes, yeah, no, I didn't even notice he was still out there or whatever, which is not true. And that after the game, a couple of them would have got together, maybe not went out, but at least in the bowels of the arena, how are things going down here? How are you getting together? Certainly would have happened again in Toronto. But on the ice, for the sake of the fans, Matthews wouldn't acknowledge it. It's almost, we were talking before we fired up the mic, seeing a little pro wrestling, right? Like the show you give the crowd is different than the one that's behind the curtain. Is there value in at least that, or is it just up to fans to get to a point where, we got to know what this is right now?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any deep, dark secrets about what it is. And again, it's a very personal thing. Some guys are like that. Some guys aren't. Some guys are trying to make a point. Some guys aren't. Some guys are pretending they didn't see it. Some guys, it's a very individual thing. But at the end of the day, it is entertainment. Hockey is entertainment. Mm-hmm. And some players get that part of it. Some guys don't, so... Mitch Marner, I don't know Mitch Marner really. Mitch Marner seems to me to be a guy that understands the performative nature of being a professional athlete, that you're in front of a lot of people who are watching everything you do. And I still get the sense just from body language and watching his interviews that a guy like Austin Matthews has nothing but disdain for that. So, I can see how a thing like that might happen. But I think one of the other things is that, I think fans should never read too much into any of that because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is when they play against each other. And the one thing I will say is that a lot of times you can tell, when a player leaves a team and goes somewhere else. You can tell in future games between the teams if the player was liked in the locker room, because when the guy becomes a guy you're playing against, you can just play against him and it's all good and a shin tap here and there. And other guys, they go after him. And those are the ones where you go, yeah, that seems to be a little more than just, they, so, they are people and, they carry both friendship and grudges. Sure. And, it's interesting to watch how some of those things come out in public.
I'm curious, as we kind of shift things over towards the Senators, and I got a few things I'd like to ask you about here, but we did just watch them play their first game without Jake Sanderson, which sounds like it's going to be the case for, I think they're saying week to week, so we'll see how long this is going to take. But what has to happen for that blue line or that entire group to kind of cover up for what is not just your best offensive defenseman, but also your best defensive defenseman? He's your number one guy. He kind of does a little bit of everything. I think we all understand Thomas Chabot is certainly capable of taking on a little bit more of the offensive load, and he has been a number one before. But, what is it that the Sens are going to miss most, and how are they going to have to adapt to fill in such a huge missing piece until he gets back here?
Well, they're all going to have to be a little bit better. Defense and everybody else. Forwards are going to have to come back and help more defensively, and they have to be more aware. For the defense itself, you're now going to have guys, not Chabot, because you're right. He's been a number one before, so he's played those minutes against that kind of competition, so it's nothing new to him. But everybody now has got to move up. All the slotting changes, and Tyler Clevin, for example, is going to play as a second side left winger instead of the third side left winger. And he's going to face players that he hasn't faced all that much before. He's going to face better players more often, play more minutes than he's used to having to play. And so, there's going to be a change for everybody. And, on this team, I kind of have three stages. Brady Tkachuk, to me, is the most important player on the team because he is the attitude of the team. Mm-hmm. Tim Stützle is the most talented guy on the team. He's the best forward on the team. But the best player on the team, that's Sanderson. And because now I think people have realized, through league play, but also through the Olympics and through Four Nations, that he's one of the best defensemen in the world. He's one of those guys. He's not just a really good player. He's one of the best defensemen on the planet. Mm-hmm. And so there's no way that you can replace him. There's no one guy who's going to get all of his minutes and all of his situations. That's impossible to replace. There's no second Jake Sanderson in the organization or in any organization. Right. You don't get two of those. But the interesting part, when you look at Jake Sanderson is Nobody plays more minutes. Nobody plays more minutes at even strength. Nobody plays more minutes on power play other than Tim Stützle. There's nobody that plays more minutes shorthanded. Nobody blocks more shots. And if you look at how he plays the game, he's involved. His play touches everybody. He's got to be in close communication and in a symbiotic relationship with the goaltender, the other defenseman, and he's moving the puck to the forwards, and he gets involved in the play. So there's no part of the game that he doesn't touch. And that's a very hard thing to replace. But that being said, this is one of those situations where you say to yourself, if you believe in the system and you're honest to the system and you play the system diligently, the system can save you. Because it becomes, the whole is more important than each individual part. And as good a player as Jake Sanderson is, you were asked yesterday in the pregame show, that was one of the questions that Creature asked it on Creech for the Top. Can Ottawa win without Jake Sanderson? And I said, yes, they have in the past. They had a winning record last time. Over the times when they haven't had him, they've had a winning record. But it requires you have to play a different way because he is such an impactful player. But, you have to take it on as a whole group. And I think that's probably the big thing that sometimes gets missed is that, when you lose a player of that caliber, it's more than just you lose his skill. You use the connection he has with every part of your team all over the ice because those players do connect with everybody on the team, like Cale Makar does in Colorado.
Sure.
He's not just a defenseman. He's part of the defense. He's part of helping out the goaltender. He's part of the rush. He's part of the power. He's part of everything. Well, Sanderson is that to Ottawa. So, you have to really rely on the system and trust the system and do a bit more, play a bit more conscious of the things that you don't have when you don't have Sanderson and try to do your part to make up for that. But, we'll see over time whether that's easier said than done.
Dean, it's just anecdotal, but it feels like anytime I'm watching a different game and so-and-so is out of the lineup, an important piece for whatever team, it almost always feels like when the play-by-play guy or the panelist or whatever comes in with the record without this player, their record almost always seems better than I expect it to be. When you yank a Jake Sanderson out of the puzzle, you're like, oh man, this is going to be a mess. And it's not always the case, but it seems like more often than I would expect it is the case. Do you think it is as simple as the line we all draw that's like, well, everybody kind of understands, oh, I better get to work. I'm going to have to pull a little more than I'm used to. And then they do just have this emotional letdown when that guy returns. Is it that simple, or is there more to it than that, do you think?
I don't think it's an emotional letdown, but what it does is it returns to what it was before. And you have to remember from an athlete's standpoint, injuries by and large, and obviously not exclusively because they can be career-ending, for example, but injuries are almost always a finite amount of time. This guy's going to be out for 2 weeks. This guy's going to be a month, or this one, it's going to be game to game. So there's a finite amount of time. And so for a player, you can wrap your head around the fact that we're going to be missing this guy for this long. And yes, you have to step up your play, but there's also the fact that for a lot of players, they look at it as a great career opportunity for them because they can show management and the coaching staff and their teammates that they're capable of doing more, that they can be more than they have been in the role that they have been given, when that star player's in the lineup. And so you can show that you can handle more ice time in tougher situations against better competition. So, a teammate is never going to say that it's good for their game, for their careers, to have an important player out for a little bit of time. You would never say that because no team ever wants to lose a great player, because over any stretch of time, they do have an impact on how good you are as a team. Yeah. But for short spurts during, injuries, it is an opportunity for a player to show. And if you're in the last year of a contract, you're showing the league, what you're capable of doing when you get more opportunity. So I think that is always part of it, that, when you lose a star player especially, it can be very galvanizing for the team, that they end up playing a stronger, tighter team game because they're forced into that. They're forced into, having to change that mindset where, let's face it, I think it's human nature. When you have a player like Jake Sanderson, when the puck goes back to the net, guys are going, okay, Sanderson's going back together. I'm going to get my wheels going because that puck's coming up the ice. It's either on his stick or coming from his stick, but here we go. And you don't think about, well, there's no Jake Sanderson. I better get back down. I usually come down 5 feet inside the blue line, so I'm that outlet guy. Maybe I should come back down to the hash marks in case he gets caught. I can help defend.
Sure.
It changes the way a player has to think about his game. But like I said, for a lot of players, an injury to a really important player can inadvertently be a bit of a help for your career, in that it gives you a chance to show the people you work for that you can do more and you can be responsible and you can have an impact.
Yeah. The Hamburglar run, I guess, a perfect example. All of a sudden, it's your show now, man. Get out there and let's see what you can do. But I'm sort of curious here what you make of the Sens right now. As you and I talk on Tuesday afternoon, I believe they're 3 points out all of a sudden. They have been red hot for quite some time. I guess that Olympic break kind of breaks it up and kind of makes you forget how well the Sens have been playing. There was sort of that gap that everybody was focused on something else, and you come back and the Sens are still as hot as they had been. But there have been moments throughout the season where I've seen sort of the online reaction, or people go, it's just not our year, or, too many injuries and things have sort of gone wrong. It doesn't feel like it's going to happen. And I certainly fall into that group. I've looked at the Sens and said, they're better than this, but sometimes things just happen and it's not going to be your year. But now you're sitting here 3 points out. There's no reason to believe that they can't do this now, having made up this kind of ground. I don't think anybody believes it's sustainable to be this hot through the rest of the season, but you don't have to be quite this hot now. You have done the lion's share of the dig out, and you're not quite out yet, but if you can just be pretty good down the stretch here, Detroit's having some issues, Boston is having some issues. What is it for you, like, is that you've seen through this hot stretch? Is it just that they're healthy? Is it, I guess I say they're healthy after we've just talked about Jake Sanderson suddenly being out of the lineup, but what has allowed them to get back this close?
Yeah, for me, it's simple. I'm not fan-like. I'm not emotional about it. For me, it's more mathematical, analytical. And to me, the numbers have been and are very plain. The biggest single reason for Ottawa's turnaround has been goaltending. They're getting it now, and they didn't get it in the first 3 quarters of the season. And it's just as simple as that. If you look at all the analytics, if you look at all just the base stats, you don't even have to go into analytics. You just look at base stats. This team has been one of the best defensive teams in the league for most of the season. And what has let them down has been the team save percentage, which is, let's face it, most times mostly made up of the goaltenders' save percentage. So this team last year made the playoffs, and they had the 8th best team save percentage in the league. Right now, because of how inconsistent goaltending was in the first half of the season, they're last in the league in team save percentage. But like I said, if you look at the numbers and you look at certain analytics, and actually, you know what? Noodles was saying this on the TSN trade deadline day broadcast, and he talked about if you look at some of the analytics that players that coaches and managers look at, not what fans dig up online. And you have to remember that online, the analytics that fans are looking at, those analytics services at that level are looking at about 400 data points in any given game. At the professional level, with either the departments that they have or the independent services like Sportlogique that a lot of teams employ, they're looking at 4,000 data points per game, and they're doing a lot of things that are specific to facing
stuff. Is pretty limited. Like there's value there, but it's not anywhere close to what the teams are getting.
Absolutely, it'll give you an indication of things. But if you go through a lot of the analytics, the Ottawa Senators are first in so many really important categories. Not just high in the league, first in the league. Yeah. And as Noodles was saying, if the Ottawa Senators this year had been from start to finish receiving doesn't have to be top 10 goaltending, just the league average. Right. Just the league average in goaltending save percentage, this team right now would be challenging for first in the conference, not challenging to catch up to a playoff spot. And so when people say what's happening now, while still not perfect, they are getting good goaltending. If you look at this team, and you don't even need to do any analytics, you can just use ChatGPT to figure this out. You can go to the website and just do it yourself on your phone. Just go to your phone right now, go to ChatGPT or whatever AI service you look at, and just type in what would Ottawa Senators points percentage be had they received league average goaltending this season. Well, when you put the math in that way, their winning percentage is in the 700s.
Yeah.
And so when you ask me what's different now, this team, even though the results haven't always shown it, this team has been one of the best defensive teams in the league for quite a while. And what's caught up now is, since Linus has come back, they have gotten, on average, better goaltending than they've been receiving. And when they get goaltending on any given night where the save percentage is 900 or better, they're nearly unbeatable. Nearly unbeatable. And this is not an opinion. Anybody can go get the stats. The statistics and the analytics are not secret. It's open information. So, it's not an opinion and people can disagree with your eye test. I say, don't believe anything I say. Go and find the numbers yourself.
Right.
They're not secret. And numbers aren't biased. Numbers are what they are. Numbers are not fan driven. The numbers are facts. So, So when you ask me what the big difference is, they don't play defensively much different than they did 3 months ago. But the difference is the goaltending they're getting now is far more consistent and at a higher level than it was a couple of months ago. And that's basically the backbone of this comeback. They've always been a tight defensive team and a good offensive team. They're not in the top 10 offensively, but they're close to it. They've been 11th, 10th, 9th almost all season long. So if you're one of the better defensive teams in the league, and then you add to that, that you can generate enough offense to win games. The Bear stats, goals against, Ottawa's still in the bottom third of the league because that's a season-long average.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take into account how good or bad your goaltending was. Just how many goals have you let in on an average per game. And so, that's why there's a lot of analytics that are just far more telling. Like, people always ask me and they say, like, what is this expected goals against or expected goals for? Like, how is that different, from just shots? And I tell them, I said, well, the math is just far more complete. I said, in the expected goals calculation that they use, I said, it's the number of shots, but where the shots come from and what the percentage of success rate is for that shot. Like in the NHL, a shot from the point turns into a goal about 3% of the time. A breakaway turns into a goal about 30% of the time. So each game, when the computer algorithms are working out, what your number is expected goals, it's not just shots, that bare number. It's how good were those shots? What is generally the percentage that those shots actually turn into goals? And that's what creates those numbers. So it's far more telling about, what's actually happening with how good the chance is and what the likelihood is based on the game's average that's going to turn into a goal, or the reverse is true for a goaltender's expected goals against below. It tells you how good they are at stopping the stoppables, for example, and how many fluke goals, do they let in? How many floaters from the point do they let in? And for an NHL goalie, that actually is a really, really low number. But because we see so many replays every night, that looks like a more common occurrence than it is, when really it's not. Floaters from the point, unless they're redirected, unless they're tipped, they just don't go in the net at the NHL level. And the stats prove that to be true. But again, you can get perceptions of things because a goal like that gets played everywhere. Anytime somebody sends a bare wrister in from the point and that goes in, that gets shown 100 times in 24 hours, or more than, even way more than that. But you know what I mean. So my really super long answer, Matt, is that this team is playing really well now, and they're on this hot streak, and they're making a charge to get back and get a playoff spot, mostly because they are still playing outstanding defense, but they are getting better, more competent, and consistent goaltending.
Dean, as you know, I follow that blue team down the highway a little bit, and floaters from the point not going in is something I'm quite familiar with the player that they run out on the power play to quarterback that for them. And this was, I had a lot of people tell me all last year I was being overly negative on the Leafs, who won the division. Like, they never have the puck. They are having an incredible goaltending season. And if that were to falter, things will not go well. And here we are a year later, and it has faltered, and it has not gone well. I'm curious, coming out of the deadline, I'm sure you've already discussed this to death, so I don't want to, hit you over the head with it too many times. But
we can kill things twice, Matt. It doesn't matter.
With the Sens at the time of the deadline, I believe were 5 out, maybe 4 out, but sort of in that neighborhood. And I was sort of, my opinion on the team was, I probably wouldn't buy. There's still a lot of road to go, and you've been through a lot. Like, I'm not sure this is the year to sell the farm. A lot of the farm has already been sold, or, I wouldn't do much, but I wouldn't sell either. I wouldn't pull the rug out from under these guys. They have put in a lot of work to get this close. I'd probably stand pretty close to Pat. And that's essentially what they did, but they did swap out a David Perron for a Warren Foegele. Similar profile in terms of being kind of middle six guys. Obviously, they got significantly younger with Warren Foegele, got a little bit cheaper. Did you expect, similar to me, that would sort of be the route, that they would sort of come close to stand pat? Were you surprised about the acquisition of Foegele, the departure of Perron? Perron said on the way out the door, and I don't think he said it in a crappy way. I don't think he was trying to throw an elbow at the organization, but he did kind of mention, that it felt like they struggled to find a fit for me. What did you make of the deadline and the way Ottawa went about it?
Well, first of all, I'll start with David's comments on the way out. I understand what he's saying in that he was moved around a lot. He played in the first line, second line, third line, fourth line. He was moved around a lot. And I get why, he felt like there wasn't really a spot for him. My response would be, that's because you didn't seize any of those jobs and make it your own. There is some play. Sometimes players have to take responsibility for what happens. It's not other people making arbitrary decisions about their game and their life that they have no part of. If you have a job on a team in a certain role and you fulfill it so well that they can't replace you, then that's your role and you're staying there. Tim Stutz is the number one center on this team for a reason, and they're not swapping him out. You know what I mean? Like, so I would say that about what David feels. And, I understand that he's always on teams that he's played on, been an important guy in various areas. And he was an important guy on this team in various areas as well, not the least of which is the locker room and the mentorship of young players. He's excellent at that. But, you also as a player have to be realistic about your age and your speed in the highest tempo game this has ever been. Yeah. And both of those things were not on his side. In Warren Foegele, as you mentioned, they get a guy younger, cheaper, and faster. In a game that is getting faster, he's about the same. He's a bottom six forward, and that's what Perron basically has become at this point in his career. And I wish him well in Detroit. I hope he does well because he's a fantastic guy.
And the Sens did well by him. Sent him back to a place where he's clearly comfortable. Sure. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So, there was no penalizing him there. I think Ottawa would have been able and willing to take a bigger swing on another right shot defenseman if they would have had the ability, to be honest with you. I think that Steve was out there, Staios was out there, and he's making phone calls. They talked to everybody that had a right shot defenseman, a veteran guy that's, going to upgrade what you already have, not something that's equal or the same. And those conversations took place. But the bottom line is, if you wanted to be in those derbies, you had to have what they were looking for. Ottawa doesn't have a first-round draft pick this year. And some scouts outside of the organization believe that Ottawa only has two real prospects on the way. One is Halliday and the other one is Yakimchuk. Right. So if another team wants a first-round draft pick or draft picks and you don't have many left and they want a couple of prospects or a number one prospect and you only have two in your organization, like you don't have as much to be able to offer. And I look at what, Mackenzie Weegar ended up getting moved for, and when I was asked on the air about it, I said, well, Ottawa couldn't make that deal because they don't have those parts to trade. They couldn't make that deal because they don't have those things. You can't make them appear, and Steve Staios is in a situation where, organizationally, he was left with what he was left with. He was left with the knowledge that this first round draft pick was going to be forfeited. And he was left with the draft picks that the team had already made, and some have developed and some have not developed nearly as well as everybody hoped they had. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, with Tyler Boucher, there's a first round draft pick and he looks to be a million miles away from the NHL because he's been injured a million times. And that's not his fault, but it's one of those things where, Steve Staios is left with that. Yeah. That's just the reality. That's just the way it is. So, I think that Steve may have taken a bigger swing for something that they wanted, which is a player that fills a specific need or role right now that is better than what you currently have in that role, that is in the right age range and the right contract range and not a rental. And to be in that market, you have to be able to be in a position to give up things. And Steve, I just don't think had enough in the bank that he could get into those conversations seriously.
As we look ahead here to the playoffs, and nothing is locked in yet. We don't know for sure who's in, who's out, but I have begun, and I haven't had to do this in a long time, Dean, as it pertains again to that blue team down the highway, to be like, okay, what do I want to watch this year? Because normally I know what I want to watch, and this year they're not going to be a part of it. So I've started to look ahead, and I say, what are some matchups that could really be exciting to me? And as of like a week ago, I would have said Buffalo Montreal is going to be such a blast. Like, that is going to be so much fun if we were to get that. And now Buffalo has jumped Tampa into first place, and we get to a point where if Ottawa can get in, there's a chance that would be the matchup, Ottawa-Buffalo.
Yeah.
And that would be a lot of fun. And I sort of draw it back. I'm curious to get your take on this, having been around the guys a little bit and the knowledge of things. Because Rob and I had this conversation on the show a few times going into last year's Toronto-Ottawa thing, that this is going to be so much fun. It's been so long since we've had the Battle of Ontario. It's going to be a war. And it always kind of is, but it's between he and I. He's a big Sens fan, and I'm a Leaf guy. And guys our age kind of remember this. But the players don't really. Like, did Matthews and Nylander have this history? Does Stützle growing up in Germany? Like, they're aware that it's a thing, but the rivalry at this point feels a little bit more between the fans than it does between the players. And with enough head-to-head matchups, it can build itself back up to being that thing. Buffalo-Ottawa, for a while there, coming out of the lockout, was one of the best rivalries in the NHL. If the Sens are able to get in here and get a crack at Buffalo, would it be similar last year to Toronto in that maybe the emotions among fan bases would still be high, but it would take the players a little time to get ramped up there? Certainly the skill would be off the charts. What do you make of the state of what might be on the verge of being reignited here in Ottawa-Buffalo rivalry?
Well, if it were Ottawa-Buffalo, one thing you know is that Buffalo will be wired. It will be, getting in the playoffs for the first time in 14 years is a big thing, but that city will be insane because they've been waiting for so long. Yeah. And for Ottawa, I'm sure it would be, part relief in that you were able to catch up and get there. And, and now you play Buffalo. The thing is that, a series is going to be what it's going to be based on hate. Like you can butter it up and serve it a million different ways. Sure. But the reality is in this game, series are as intense as they're going to be based on whether there's true hate between certain players or just certain whole teams. And if you don't really develop that hate, then it's just a series where guys skate around and somebody wins and somebody loses and you go home. But fans don't go, wow, that was hammering. That was hammer and tong. That was, and that's why, those of us in a later generation, and you included in that, you remember what the true Battle of Ontario was, and you can't figure out how these guys don't understand that. Well, they never saw it. They weren't a part of it. They didn't live it. They can't know. But Ottawa and Buffalo could become that because there are some legitimate hatred between individual players on the two teams, and over the course of a series that can bubble into even more players, so that could be really good. There already is plenty of that between Ottawa and Montreal. That would be, I think, an instant heated rivalry if they got to meet each other in the playoffs again. But you really have to wait for it to start, for it to evolve and become whatever it's going to become. But Buffalo Ottawa would have the requisite ingredients to turn that little smoldering barbecue into an inferno. And like I said, not the least of which is how wired up Buffalo and that team, the city of Buffalo and the team in Buffalo, would be just to start the series. And, with the understanding that they're good, that they should be able to win. They've been the better team over the course of the regular season and determined not to be pushed around. The changes that they've made in Buffalo, especially to the back end, is designed pretty clearly. If you're looking at what Jarmo Kekalainen's done, he's been pretty clear in that he wants to kind of build off the Vegas model, where you have good goaltending, gigantic defense, and then you look to just score enough to be able to win games in the playoffs. But that's how they've made they're not trying to fool anybody. Everybody can see what the tape measure is, and that is now a physically huge defense in Buffalo. So you can tell what kind of hockey they think it's going to be in the playoffs in the East. They think it's going to be battleship hockey, and that's what Ottawa would have to be ready for.
As we kind of come down the stretch here, if there was an off night, between, if the Sens are in and you've got something else to look around at, like, does your brain go there the same way mine did already? Start to look ahead at who, we're going to get, we've all known for months now in the Central, two monsters are going to lock horns. It looks like it's going to be Dallas, Minnesota. That feels like can't miss hockey. I don't know. The Pacific right now is kind of down, but I think seeing Anaheim back in, like a young team like that I don't know whether they belong, whether they've arrived early or whatever, but they would be fun to watch. Is there anything else like that starts to roll around in your head of like, I'd like to see what those guys look like in the playoffs, or this particular matchup could be kind of fun if I'm not doing a Sens game?
Yeah, you know what? In my off time, I'm still watching hockey.
Yeah.
But in my off time, I find myself, just for entertainment value, since I actually like staying up late. I'm not an early riser. I like staying up late. I just find myself just gravitating towards a couple of Pacific Division teams because they're so fun to watch. Mm-hmm. And one of them is Anaheim, because they've come so far in such a short length of time.
Yep.
And to be like a true playoff team. It's not like they're bluffing or fluking this. They're leading. It is the Pacific Division, which is not super competitive,
right,
but still they're leading it. And
great
San Jose,
goaltending and tons of top forwards. Yeah, and San Jose, you're right, man. Like they're so much fun to watch right now.
So fun to watch, and they're right behind Seattle. And the way Seattle is right now, I can easily see San Jose being able to overtake them. They just
we could
they have
get
to
a
get
Ducks
more
Sharks matchup here. Wouldn't that be fun? Like that.
If the Sharks just got it together just a little bit, they could easily pass Seattle.
Yeah.
But they're in catch-up mode, trying to catch up. They're only a point behind, but they just can't get on a streak. I think they've only won like 3 of their last 10 games. Yeah. Like this is the time of year, if you're going to catch up, you have to be winning 6 or 7 of 10. You can't be lounging around. So I would hope San Jose could try and make a push and get in, because I think they'd be really fun to watch. Mm-hmm. But I find on my off nights, because I do so many games in the Eastern Conference and see the Eastern Conference teams, I kind of know what everybody is, and I enjoy it, and I know which ones that I like watching. But when I want to have some hockey escapism, I look to those 2 young teams in the Pacific Division, because I just find both of them just so fun to watch.
100%. No, I'm with you on that, and there's a chance we could see them both get into the playoffs here. And man, if Anaheim could jump Vegas or whatever and get into first, now maybe they face each other and just watch 2 young teams run and gun for a week and a half. I got time for that, Dean. That could be a lot of fun. I appreciate you doing this as always. I know it's been some late nights while the Sens have been out west while you're calling action there. It's been a successful road trip for them. We'll see how things look when they get home, if they can keep this hot run going and sneak their way into the playoffs. They have certainly, as you suggest, played pretty well all year long, and in some cases very, very well. They're getting saves now. James Reimer throwing up shutouts for the Ottawa Senators. I don't know that anybody saw that coming at the beginning of the season.
No, I didn't.
No, so that's where we are. A hockey season is a long period of time. You never know what's going to happen. But
not many guys in history, Matt, have gone from the Spengler Cup to helping a team chase down a playoff spot in the NHL. That's not on many people's bingo cards.
It's true.
But good on them.
Yeah, for sure. This has been fun, Dean. I always appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for doing this.
Anytime, my friend.
There goes Dean Brown. Always enjoy talking to that guy. Always makes a ton of time for us. Always brings the really good insights. A lot of experience there calling the game. And he doesn't mind when I poke the bear a little bit and ask him to talk some baseball off the top. So thank you so much to Dean Brown once more for making time for the Tall Can Audio Podcast. Thank you for making the time and listening to this edition of the podcast. Don't forget, on Thursday morning, we will dive deep on what's going on with Canadian hockey TV ratings. Why, after well over a decade of Rogers Sportsnet having the national broadcast rights and being able to call themselves the home of hockey, do people still choose TSN whenever they can? Because that's what's happening right now. So we'll get into that on the Thursday morning edition of the show. Hope you'll join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt Robinson. Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to the pod wherever you're hearing me right now. Give us a follow on social media at Tall Can Audio. We'll talk to you on Thursday morning.